Frank Morrison sat on his porch that December evening, watching the snow begin to fall. The Cardinals were at the feeder he'd built 30 years back, red flashes against white, loyal as clockwork. He had a hardware store bag beside him, cabinet hinges for Linda's kitchen. 42 years of marriage, a life earned. Tomorrow was Sunday. Ray and Debbie were coming for pot roast. Frank had no idea it would be the last normal day of his life. The dinner went fine at first. Linda laughing too loud at Ray's jokes, Debbie complimenting the roast. When the wine ran low, Frank headed to the basement for another bottle. He was halfway down the stairs when he heard his wife's voice, soft, intimate, cutting. "Even you taste better than him." Ray's low chuckle followed. Frank froze. The wine bottle trembled in his hand. The cold cement wall pressed against his palm like ice, and everything stopped. Frank climbed back up those stairs. His face was granite. He poured the wine with a steady hand. Linda's glass first, then Ray's, then Debbie's. They didn't notice. Linda was telling some story about the church quilting circle. Ray had his hand on the back of her chair. Frank sat down and cut his pot roast. The meat was tough in his mouth, or maybe his jaw was just too tight. "Frank, you're quiet tonight," Debbie said. She was a nice woman. Didn't deserve this either. "Just tired," Frank said. They left around 9. Linda walked them to the door, laughing at something Ray whispered. Frank watched from the kitchen window as Ray's hand lingered on her lower back. The LLC truck in the driveway had a new decal. Veteran owned and operated. Frank wasn't a veteran. Ray wasn't either. That night, Frank lay beside his wife of 42 years and stared at the ceiling. She snored softly. The clock read 2:17 a.m., then 3:42, then 4:58. He replayed it in his head. Her whisper, Ray's laugh, the way she'd leaned into him at dinner. How long had this been going on? At dawn, Frank made coffee in the dark kitchen. The bird feeder outside was already busy. Cardinals, sparrows, a blue jay. He'd filled it yesterday. Linda never noticed things like that. Never said thank you for the cabinets he fixed, the oil he changed in her car, the gutters he cleaned every fall. Invisible labor. That's what Michelle had called it once, before she stopped talking to him. Monday morning, Linda came down in her robe. Frank was at the kitchen table with his coffee. "I heard what you said last night," he said quietly. "At dinner, to Ray." Linda's face crumpled instantly. Tears came like someone had flipped a switch. "Oh God, Frank, I'm so sorry. It was... Ray kissed me at the Christmas party 2 years ago. I was drunk. I pushed him away. That stupid joke. I don't know why I said it. I was nervous, trying to prove to myself it meant nothing." She reached for his hand across the table. It was the gesture she used to do when they were young, before Michelle was born, before everything got complicated. 42 years, Frank. Please, we can fix this. I'll call a counselor today. I promise. Frank wanted to believe her. God, how he wanted to believe her. Because the alternative was too big, too painful, too much work at 68. Whoa. "Okay," he said. That week, Linda was the wife he remembered. She cooked his favorite meals, touched his arm when she passed, asked about his day. They had an appointment with a counselor for Friday. Frank tried to work in his workshop, but his hands wouldn't cooperate. The drill slipped. He cut a board 3 inches too short. At the hardware store, Bob and Stan gave him the usual greeting, and Frank smiled back. Everything looked normal. But Tuesday afternoon, his neighbor Dolores knocked on the door. She was 71, a retired bank teller with sharp eyes and a warm smile. She held a Tupperware container. "Brought you some cookies, honey," she said. "So the neighbors think I'm just being neighborly." She came inside and opened the Tupperware. Underneath the cookies were photocopied papers. "I was at the county clerk's office filing my own paperwork last week," Dolores said. "Saw Ray's signature on 3 different documents. All for your daddy's cabin, Frank." Frank's hands shook as he took the papers. Deed transfers. 3 of them. Dated over the last 18 months. The cabin his father had built in 1962. The place where Dad had taught him to fish, to swing a hammer, to be a man. The signature said Franklin J. Morrison, but it wasn't his handwriting. "That's not Linda's signature," Dolores said, pointing, "but it's close enough to fool a clerk who doesn't know her." Frank spread the papers on his kitchen table. The cabin was being transferred to an LLC, RJH Properties. Ray's initials. His father's voice came back to him. 1998, hospital bed. Cancer eating him from the inside. Dad grabbing Frank's hand with what strength he had left. "Keep the cabin in the family, Frankie. For the grandkids. For the ones who come after." Frank had promised. He'd meant it. But Michelle hadn't visited the cabin in years, hadn't visited him in years, and now the cabin was almost gone, stolen by his wife and his best friend while Frank fixed Linda's cabinets and made Sunday pot roast. Dolores touched his shoulder. "Frank, if they forged your signature for the cabin, what else might they have taken?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Frank looked at the deed papers, at his father's name above the forged signature, at 18 months of planning. This wasn't a drunken kiss at a Christmas party. This was systematic theft. "I need to think," Frank said. Dolores nodded and left the cookies. Real ones this time, underneath everything else. That night, Frank couldn't sleep again. For 3 days, Linda had been attentive, apologetic, cooking his favorite meals. He'd almost let himself hope. Then, Tuesday afternoon, Dolores knocked on his door with a Tupperware container. Inside were cookies, and underneath the cookies, the truth that would destroy everything. Thursday morning, Frank started looking. He went through the filing cabinet in his workshop, the one where he kept important papers, tax returns, insurance policies, the checkbook Linda said she'd been balancing. The numbers didn't add up. 3 years ago, their joint checking account had $14,000. Now it had $847. He traced the withdrawals, $500 here, $200 there, a $3,400 chunk in September, all marked household expenses in Linda's handwriting. Frank opened the credit card statements next, 3 cards he didn't recognize, all in his name. Capital One, $18,000 balance. Discover, $12,000. Chase, $13,000, $43,000 in debt he didn't know he had. His chest tightened. The workshop suddenly felt too small, the fluorescent lights too bright. He sat down hard on his stool, papers scattering across the workbench. His phone buzzed, a text from Linda. "Dinner at 6, making your favorite, meatloaf." Frank stared at the message, 3 heart emojis at the end. He didn't respond. That afternoon, Frank was looking for his winter gloves. Linda's yoga class didn't end until 5, so the house was quiet. He checked the coat closet by the front door, his jacket, Linda's wool coat, the scarves they never wore. Something hard in Linda's coat pocket. Frank pulled it out. A cheap flip phone, the kind you buy at a gas station with cash. He'd never seen it before. He shouldn't turn it on. He knew that. But his thumb was already pressing the power button. The screen lit up. No password. Hundreds of text messages. Frank scrolled. His vision blurred. His hands started shaking so badly he had to sit down on the closet floor. Linda's coat still in his lap. The messages went back 3 years. Not 2, 3. Can't wait till the old fool signs the final transfer. After we sell his tools, we'll have the RV money too. 3 more months and we're free. Miss you already. Last night was perfect. He actually believed me about the Christmas party. So gullible. Frank kept scrolling, pictures he couldn't unsee, plans spelled out in detail. Every Sunday dinner, every holiday, every time Ray had clapped him on the shoulder and called him buddy. All lies. Every single moment. He found the date stamp. Messages going back to January 2022, 3 years ago, right after Ray's second divorce, right after Linda had suggested they help Ray get back on his feet by inviting him to dinner more often. Frank had thought he was being a good friend. He'd been the mark the whole time. His phone buzzed again. "Linda. Home in 20 minutes. Can you set the table?" Frank's thumb hovered over the reply button. Then he scrolled to the most recent message, sent yesterday morning. After Linda's tearful apology, after she'd held his hand and promised they could fix things, the message to Ray read, "Old fool bought it, cried during counseling yesterday, 6 more months and the cabin's ours. Keep playing the concerned friend." Frank read it 3 times, the calculated cruelty of it, the premeditation. She'd looked him in the eye, held his hand, cried what he'd thought were real tears, all while planning to rob him blind. And Ray, 20 years of friendship, 20 years of Sunday dinners, of borrowing tools, of Frank helping him move twice, of being there when Ray's marriages failed. All of it had been Frank being useful, not valued, used. He powered off the phone, put it back in Linda's pocket, hung the coat up exactly as he'd found it. His hands moved automatically, like he was watching someone else's body go through the motions. The meatloaf dinner was agony. Linda served it with a smile, touching his shoulder as she passed. "I know things have been hard," she said softly, "but we're going to be okay. I can feel it." Frank cut his meatloaf into small, precise pieces. He couldn't taste anything. After dinner, he told Linda he had to run to the hardware store. Instead, he drove to the church parking lot and sat in his truck with the engine off. It was cold enough that his breath fogged the windows, cold enough that he couldn't feel his fingers after a while. From where he'd parked, he could see the hair salon on the corner. Linda's car was there. She'd mentioned a touch-up appointment at 7. Through the big front window, Frank could see her in the chair, laughing at something. Then Ray's truck pulled up, the one with the veteran-owned decal. Frank watched Ray walk into the salon. Through the window, he saw Ray's hand slide to Linda's lower back, saw her lean into him, comfortable, familiar. Saw them kiss, not passionately, but easily. The kiss of two people who'd done this 1,000 times. The hairdresser turned away, giving them privacy. She knew. The whole damn town probably knew. Frank sat in his truck for another hour. Cars came and went. The temperature dropped. His coffee from that morning sat cold in the cup holder, a skin forming on top. He thought about Vietnam, about Khe Sanh in '69, about the rockets coming in, about pulling Earl from that burning truck, about the shrapnel that had torn through his arm and left a scar from wrist to elbow. He'd survived all of that, come home, built a life, stayed quiet, did his work, fixed things, and this betrayal by his wife and his best friend in a small Indiana town, while Frank fixed cabinets and filled bird feeders, this was somehow worse than the war, because in the war, you knew who the enemy was. When he got home, Linda was already in bed, reading a paperback romance novel. "Did you get what you needed at the store?" she asked. "Yeah," Frank said. "Good night, honey." She reached up and kissed his cheek. Her perfume was new, not the one he'd bought her for Christmas, something expensive. Frank brushed his teeth and lay down beside her. She turned off the light and was snoring within minutes. Frank stared at the ceiling. 11:47 p.m., 12:33 a.m., 1:18 a.m. At 2 in the morning, he got up and went to his workshop, turned on the space heater and the fluorescent lights, made a pot of coffee on the hot plate he kept out there. The workshop was organized the way he'd kept it for 50 years. Tools arranged by size, everything in its place. His need for control when the world was chaos. His father had taught him that. "A messy shop is a messy mind, Frankie." Frank pulled out his old rotary phone from the drawer. His mother's phone, the one she'd had since the 70s. Still worked, barely rang anymore. He had a lawyer's number written on a scrap of paper. Jim Pritchard had an office above Sally's Cafe on Main Street. Dolores had recommended him after her late husband's business partner had tried to screw her over. Frank picked up the receiver. Set it down, picked it up again, set it down. Who cared if he fought back? He was 68. Linda and Ray were winning because they were shameless, because they were younger, because they could start over, and Frank was just old, tired, alone. His daughter hadn't called in 5 years. Earl was in Arizona. His parents were dead. The town already knew about Linda and Ray. That awkwardness at the hardware store made sense now. What was the point of fighting when you were this isolated? Frank opened his desk drawer and pulled out his Purple Heart. He'd never displayed it. Wasn't his style. The metal was tarnished now, the ribbon faded. He turned it over in his palm, remembering the hospital in Da Nang, the surgery, the fever, the long flight home. He'd survived for this? To be robbed by his wife? To have his best friend steal his stories and his dignity? Frank set the metal down and put his head on the workbench. The wood was cold against his forehead. The coffee maker gurgled. The space heater clicked on and off. He'd made his decision. He'd do nothing. Sell the house, move to Florida like defeated men do. Let Linda have the cabin. Let Ray win. It was easier than fighting. Frank must have dozed off because the next thing he knew, headlights were sweeping across the workshop window. He jerked up, neck stiff, checking his watch. 2:47 a.m. Who the hell was pulling into his driveway at 2:47 in the morning? Frank stood on stiff legs and walked to the workshop door. The security light clicked on. A beat-up Silverado sat in his driveway. Arizona plates visible, covered in 1,800 miles of road dust. Frank's chest tightened, but this time in a different way. He opened the door. Earl Vance stood there. 69 years old, weathered face, gray beard, holding a six-pack of Coors and a duffel bag over his shoulder. He was wearing a flannel jacket and jeans, his breath fogging in the December cold. Earl didn't say hello, didn't explain, just looked at Frank with eyes that had seen the same war, the same blood, the same long years after. "Dolores called," Earl said. "Let's fix this." Earl didn't wait for an invitation. He walked into the workshop, set the six-pack on the workbench, and pulled up the old stool that used to be Frank's father's. He popped open 2 beers and handed one to Frank. Then he sat and said nothing. 5 minutes passed. The space heater hummed. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Frank held the cold beer but didn't drink. Earl took a long pull from his and looked at the organized tools on the walls. "Your old man taught you right," Earl finally said. "Clean shop." Frank nodded. Another 3 minutes of silence. This was how it worked with men like them, men who'd been in the shit together. Words weren't always necessary. "Dolores told me about the cabin," Earl said. "About Linda and Ray." Frank took his first sip of beer. It was ice cold and tasted like every bad decision he'd ever made. "It's worse than that," Frank said quietly. He told Earl everything. The burner phone, the texts. 3 years, not 2. The credit cards, the forged signatures, the systematic theft, the hair salon kiss, the old fool bought it message. Earl listened without interrupting. His jaw got tighter with each detail, but he didn't explode. Didn't offer platitudes. Just listened the way a good sergeant listens to a private who's about to break. When Frank finished, Earl was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Ray's been busy with more than your wife." "What do you mean?" "I drove through town last month. Stopped at the VFW for a fish fry." Earl's eyes went hard. Ray was there, holding court with some younger vets, telling stories. "What kind of stories?" "Your stories, Frank. Quezon, the burning truck, the shrapnel." Earl tapped his own arm where Frank's scar was. "Except in Ray's version, he's the hero. He pulled me out, he got the Purple Heart. He served." Frank's beer stopped halfway to his mouth. "He's claiming he's a veteran?" "More than claiming. His whole business is built on it. Veteran-owned and operated. Gets preference on government contracts. Tells clients about his service." Earl's voice was quiet, but there was rage underneath it. "He's been telling people you weren't even there, that you're a wannabe who clings to real vets." Frank set his beer down carefully. His hands had started shaking again. "Men died over there," Frank said softly. "I know. We earned that. In blood. I know. And he's making money off it?" Earl nodded. "Built his whole business on your service. On my near death. On stories that aren't his." Frank stood up and walked to the small window. Outside, the security light illuminated his truck, the bird feeder, the quiet street. Everything looked normal. Everything was broken. "When?" Frank asked. "When what?" "When does Ray speak at the VFW?" "Friday night. Veteran recognition ceremony. He's scheduled to give a speech about his service." Earl's voice dripped contempt. "About Quezon. About pulling his buddy from a burning truck. About earning a Purple Heart." Frank turned around. "How many people will be there?" 60, 70. Veterans, families. Commander Tom is organizing it." Earl leaned forward. "Frank, I didn't drive 1,800 miles to watch you give up. Dolores told me you were thinking about running, moving to Florida, letting them win." "I'm tired, Earl. I know you are, but you're not done." Earl stood up, walked over to Frank. "You saved my life in Vietnam, pulled me out of that truck when you could have run, took shrapnel doing it, and now some asshole who never served a day is making money off that story." Frank's throat was tight. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to let Ray tell his story one more time. Friday night, in front of 60 witnesses." Earl's eyes were fierce. "And then I want you to show them your arm." The workshop was silent except for the heater clicking on. "That won't get the cabin back," Frank said quietly. "No, but it's a start, and Dolores is working on the rest." Earl picked up his beer. "You got a lawyer in this town?" "Jim Pritchard, office above Sally's Cafe." "Good. We call him Monday morning, but first we burn Ray's reputation to the ground. Public exposure, Frank, in front of the veteran community. Once they know he's a fraud, his business collapses, then the legal system finishes what we start." Frank looked at his Purple Heart on the workbench. Tarnished, forgotten, hidden in a drawer for 43 years because he didn't need to prove anything, but maybe it was time to prove something after all. "Okay," Frank said. Earl smiled for the first time since arriving. "There's the Frank Morrison I remember." They drank their beers in comfortable silence. Outside, dawn was starting to break. The Cardinals would be at the feeder soon. Frank thought about Linda upstairs, asleep in their bed, about Ray probably asleep in his own bed, dreaming about stolen cabins and stolen valor, about how silence could be mistaken for surrender. But Frank Morrison hadn't surrendered. He'd just been choosing his moment. Saturday morning, Dolores showed up at 8 with more casseroles and a folder thick with papers. Earl made coffee. Frank scrambled eggs. They sat at the kitchen table while Linda was still asleep upstairs. "Your retirement account," Dolores said, sliding papers across the table. "I called in some favors at the bank. Old colleague in the trust department." Frank looked at the statements. 3 years of withdrawals. Started small, $2,000 here, $3,500 there. Then got bolder, $15,000, $22,000. The most recent, $31,000 in August. Total, $87,000. Gone. Every withdrawal had a signature, Franklin J. Morrison, but Frank's hand had never signed those papers. "Linda's handwriting," Dolores said. "She practiced, got good at it, but if you look close," she pointed with her pen, "she dots her I's different than you do. Small thing, but it's there." "How'd you figure this out?" Frank asked. 30 years as a bank teller, you learn to spot forgeries." Dolores pulled out more papers. "Credit cards, 3 of them. Total debt, $43,000. Jewelry purchases, tools for Ray's business, a down payment on an RV they haven't bought yet." Earl whistled low. They were planning to retire together. "On Frank's money," Dolores said. "And there's more. Life insurance policy. Beneficiary was changed 8 months ago from Michelle to Ray's LLC." She looked at Frank. "Notation says, in case of workshop accident." The room went cold. They were planning... Frank couldn't finish the sentence. Maybe, maybe not. But they were thinking ahead. Dolores's voice was gentle. "Frank, this isn't impulse. This is organized crime." Earl leaned back in his chair. "We need the lawyer, Monday morning." "And we need Michelle," Dolores said quietly. Frank shook his head. "Michelle won't help. We haven't talked in 5 years. She sided with Linda during her divorce. Thinks I'm cold. Thinks I never cared about emotions." "Because Linda poisoned that well," Dolores said. She pulled out another piece of paper, a phone number written in neat handwriting. "Got this from the church directory. Michelle's in Indianapolis, works as a paralegal. She won't answer if I call. Try anyway, because Linda's been stealing from her too." Frank looked up. "What?" "Your mother's jewelry. The wedding set from 1952, Linda was supposed to hold it in trust for Michelle. Remember? You set that up after your mother died." Frank remembered. His mother's dying wish. "Give Eleanor's ring to Michelle someday, when she's ready." "Linda sold it on eBay 3 years ago," Dolores said. $800. The appraised value was $12,000. Earl's chair scraped as he stood up. "That woman is a piece of work." "Michelle deserves to know," Dolores said. "And Frank, your daughter is a paralegal. She knows fraud law. She knows how to build a case." Frank stared at Michelle's phone number. The last time they'd talked, she'd called him unreasonable, said he never listened to Linda's needs, said maybe the problems in his marriage were partly his fault. Linda had been in Michelle's ear for years, building that narrative, isolating Frank, making it easier to rob him. "Call her," Earl said. "Worst case, she hangs up. Best case, you get your daughter back." Frank picked up his cell phone. His hand shook as he dialed. It rang 4 times. He was about to hang up when... "Dad?" Her voice, cautious, guarded, but there. Frank's throat closed up. He couldn't speak. "Dad, are you okay?" He swallowed hard. "Michelle, honey, I need to tell you something about your mother, and I need you to not hang up." There was a long pause. Then, "I'm listening." Frank told her everything. The affair, the forged deeds, the credit cards, the retirement account, the jewelry, her grandmother's wedding set. When he finished, there was silence on the other end. "Michelle, I need to verify some things," she said, her voice different now, professional. "Give me 2 hours. I'll call you back." The line went dead. Frank set the phone down. "She's going to check." "Smart girl," Earl said. "Doesn't just take your word. That's good. Means when she comes around, she'll really believe." They waited. Dolores made more coffee. Earl told stories about Arizona, his wife, the separation, the long drive through the desert, thinking about the man who'd saved his life 43 years ago. At 10:47 a.m., Frank's phone rang. "Dad." Michelle's voice wasn't cautious anymore. It was fury. "I'm coming home. Tonight. And I'm bringing everything I know about criminal fraud cases." Frank's chest loosened for the first time in days. "You believe me?" I believe the bank records, Dad. I believe the eBay receipts. I believe the county clerk's office. Her voice broke slightly. And I believe you. I'm sorry I didn't before. There was a pause. Frank could hear her crying on the other end. Michelle, I'll be there by 8. We're going to fix this, Dad. All of it. When Frank hung up, Earl was grinning. That's your army, Frank. Me, Dolores, and your daughter. Now let's go to war. Michelle's Honda pulled into the driveway at 8:15 p.m. Frank had been watching from the porch for 20 minutes, coffee gone cold in his hand. When she got out of the car, he barely recognized her. 5 years did that. She was 38 now, hair shorter than he remembered, wearing jeans and a Colts sweatshirt. They stood there in the driveway, 10 feet apart, awkward. Then Michelle started crying. Frank crossed the distance and held his daughter for the first time since her wedding. She was shaking, her face pressed against his shoulder. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry I believed her. You didn't know, Frank said quietly. She's good at lying. But I should have known. I should have asked you. I should have... Her voice broke. She told me you didn't care, that you were cold, that all you cared about was your workshop and your projects. I know what she told you. Michelle pulled back, wiping her eyes. I kept the kids away from you, Dad, for 2 years, because I thought you were the problem. She looked at the house. Is she here? Upstairs, asleep. Good. I don't want to see her yet, not until I'm ready. Michelle grabbed a laptop bag from her car. Is Earl really here? In the kitchen with Dolores. They've been waiting. Michelle smiled through tears. Earl, I haven't seen him since I was 16. He taught me to skip stones at the cabin. He remembers. They went inside. The kitchen smelled like coffee and Dolores's casserole. Earl stood when Michelle entered, and she went straight to him, hugging him hard. Uncle Earl, she said. It's what she'd called him as a kid. Hey, kiddo, Earl said, his voice rough. You grew up. You got old. That's what happens when you don't visit. They sat around the kitchen table. Frank, Michelle, Earl, and Dolores. Michelle opened her laptop and pulled out a legal pad covered in notes. Okay, she said, and her voice was all business now. I spent the afternoon digging, started with the jewelry because that one made me angry. She pulled up an eBay listing on her laptop. Lynn Moore 2019, that's Mom's username. Linda Morrison, 2019, the year she started selling. Michelle turned the screen so Frank could see. Grandmother's wedding set, listed at $850, sold for $800 to a buyer in California. The photo showed the ring clearly. The inscription was visible if you zoomed in. To Eleanor, forever yours, William, 1952. Frank's mother's name, his father's handwriting. I called the buyer this afternoon, Michelle said. Nice woman, she still has it. Felt terrible when I explained. She's willing to return it. Won't even ask for her money back. Michelle's voice hardened. Mom sold my inheritance for grocery money. It's worse than that, Dolores said gently. She slid more papers across the table. The trust fund. Your grandmother set up $10,000 for you when you turned 30. It was supposed to be managed by your parents until you were ready. Michelle looked at the papers. Where is it? Gone, Dolores said. Withdrawn 2 years ago. $10,847 with interest. Linda's signature. Transferred to the joint checking account, then withdrawn in cash over 3 months. Michelle's hands flattened on the table. Frank could see her jaw working, trying to control herself. She stole from her own daughter, Earl said quietly. Her own daughter, who she convinced to hate her father, Michelle added. She looked at Frank. How long has she been doing this? We think 3 years, Frank said. Maybe longer. Michelle opened a folder and started laying out papers. I pulled up the veteran-owned business database, checked Ray's LLC. She turned her laptop again. RJH Contracting, registered January 2023, claims veteran status. Website says, she read from the screen, combat veteran, served with honor in Vietnam, understands the needs of those who served. He never served, Earl said flatly. I know. I called the National Archives this afternoon. There's no service record for Raymond Joseph Hollister, not in any branch. Michelle made a note on her legal pad. That's Stolen Valor, Federal Crime, Stolen Valor Act of 2013. Can we prove he made money off it? Frank asked. Michelle pulled out more printed pages. His client list is on the website. 14 completed projects, total value $890,000. I cross-referenced them. She pointed to names highlighted in yellow. These 3 clients are VFW members. I found their testimonials online. One of them, she read from a printout, Ray's military background gave us confidence he'd understand our needs. His story about pulling his buddy from a burning truck in Vietnam really resonated. Earl's beer can crumpled in his hand. That's Frank's story. That's my truck. That's our blood. I know, Michelle said. And we're going to use it. She looked at her father. Dad, you're going to that VFW ceremony Friday night. You're going to let Ray tell his story, and then you're going to show them your scar and tell them the truth. Frank nodded slowly. But that's just the public exposure, Michelle continued. We need legal consequences, too. I called a lawyer I know from work, Jim Pritchard. That's who Dolores recommended, Frank said. Good. He's the best. I'm meeting him Monday morning. I'm bringing everything, the forged deeds, the credit card statements, the retirement account, the trust fund theft, Ray's business records. Michelle was writing fast now, legal mind working. Criminal charges, fraud, forgery, identity theft, conspiracy, stolen valor, civil suit, return of all assets, damages, legal fees. What about Linda? Dolores asked quietly. Michelle's pen stopped. She stared at her legal pad for a long moment. Mom gets charged, too. Conspiracy to commit fraud. She's the one who did most of the forgeries. She's the one who drained the accounts. Her voice cracked slightly. She's my mother, and she's a criminal. Frank reached across the table and took Michelle's hand. I'm sorry, honey. Don't apologize. You didn't do this. She did. Michelle squeezed his hand. I'm angry, Dad. I'm so angry I can barely think straight. But we're going to channel it. We're going to build a case so tight that there's no way out for them. What kind of jail time are we looking at? Earl asked. For Mom, probably 2 to 5 years if the prosecutor pushes. For Ray, with the stolen valor added in, maybe 4 to 7 years federal. Michelle closed her laptop. But honestly, the public exposure might be worse for them. This is a small town. Everyone will know. They'll be outcasts, Dolores said. Good, Michelle said flatly. They worked until midnight. Michelle organizing documents, Earl making runs to the truck for supplies, Dolores brewing coffee and making sure everyone ate. Frank mostly watched his daughter work, the fierce concentration on her face, the way she attacked problems methodically, the legal mind he'd never really seen before. At one point, Michelle looked up and caught him watching. What? Nothing. Just, you're good at this. I'm a paralegal, Dad. This is what I do. She paused. I'm sorry I wasted 5 years not talking to you. You were protecting yourself. Thought I was the problem. I should have checked. Should have asked. Michelle's eyes were red. She was always in my ear. Your father doesn't care about feelings. Your father never made time for me. Your father is cold. And I believed her because... She stopped. Because what? Because you were always in the workshop, always fixing things. And when I needed you to just talk, you'd offer to fix something instead. Michelle's voice was soft, not accusing. I needed words, Dad. You gave me actions. Frank nodded slowly. I didn't know how to give you words. My old man didn't either. We showed love by building things, fixing things. I know that now. I'm 38, divorced, raising 2 kids alone. I get it now. Michelle smiled sadly. But at 25, when my marriage was falling apart, I needed you to say I love you and I'm here. Instead, you built me a bookshelf. A nice bookshelf, Frank said quietly. A beautiful bookshelf. I still have it. Michelle reached across the table. I'm sorry I didn't understand your language, Dad. I'm sorry I didn't learn yours. They sat there for a moment, hands clasped across legal documents and coffee cups and 5 years of missed time. Then Dolores cleared her throat. This is lovely, but we have work to do. Michelle, tell them about the timeline. Michelle straightened up, wiping her eyes. Right, okay. Here's the plan. Monday morning, Dad and I meet with Jim Pritchard. We give him everything. He files criminal complaints with the prosecutor's office and civil suits in county court. What about Friday? Earl asked. The VFW thing? Friday is the opening move. We expose Ray publicly, destroy his credibility, get the veteran community on Dad's side. That creates pressure. Michelle was making a list. Then Monday, we drop the legal hammer. Criminal charges, civil suits, Everything at once. They won't see it coming, Dolores said. No, Michelle agreed. Because Mom thinks Dad's weak. She thinks he'll stay quiet. She's been counting on that for 3 years. She looked at her father. But quiet doesn't mean weak, does it, Dad? Frank thought about Vietnam, about the long silences before an ambush, about patience being its own weapon. No, he said, it doesn't. At 12:30 a.m., they heard footsteps upstairs. Linda moving around. Earl grabbed his beer cans. Dolores gathered papers. Michelle closed her laptop. Hide this stuff, Frank said quietly. She can't know yet. They moved fast. Dolores took papers to her house. Earl took the laptop to his truck. Michelle stayed, sitting at the kitchen table with just a coffee cup, looking innocent. Linda came down in her robe, sleepy. She saw Michelle and stopped on the stairs. Michelle, what are you doing here? Visiting Dad, Michelle said, voice neutral. It's been too long. Linda's face brightened. False warmth, practiced his smile. Oh, honey, I'm so glad. We've missed you. Your father's been, well, things have been hard lately, but I think we're turning a corner. Michelle smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. I'm sure you are, Mom. Linda made herbal tea and sat with them for 20 minutes, chattering about the church quilting circle, about Ray's business doing well, about how glad she was that Frank had finally agreed to counseling. Michelle played along. Frank watched his daughter lie to his wife, smooth and effortless, and realized Michelle had learned from the best. When Linda finally went back to bed, Michelle let out a breath. I hate her, she whispered. I actually hate my own mother. I know, Frank said. No, Dad, you don't understand. I look at her and I see a stranger. Michelle's hands were shaking. That woman raised me, and I don't know her at all. Earl came back inside. It's hard when the mask comes off. The worst part? Michelle's voice broke. She looked happy to see me, like she actually missed me, and I don't know if any of it was real. Any of it. My whole childhood. Was she always lying? Was any of her love real? Frank didn't have an answer for that. They sat in the kitchen as the clock ticked past 1 a.m. Michelle in her old chair, Frank in his, Earl leaning against the counter, 3 people who'd been broken by betrayal, now building something sharp from the pieces. Friday, Michelle said finally. We start Friday, and by the time we're done, everyone in this town will know exactly who Linda and Ray really are. Monday morning, Jim Pritchard's office smelled like old coffee and legal textbooks. The conference room was small, wood paneling, a table scarred with coffee rings, a window overlooking Main Street. Jim was 50-something, gray suit, sharp eyes that missed nothing. Frank, Michelle, and Earl sat on one side of the table. Jim spread their documents across the surface like a battlefield map. Let me make sure I understand, Jim said. He pointed to different stacks. Forged signatures on 8 documents, 3 credit cards opened fraudulently, total debt $43,000, retirement account drained, $87,000 stolen, trust fund embezzlement, $10,000, life insurance beneficiary changed without authorization. He looked up. And stolen valor on top of it? Federal crime, Michelle said. Ray's been claiming veteran status for 3 years, built his entire business on it. Jim whistled low. This isn't divorce territory anymore. This is criminal court. He looked at Frank. You understand what you're starting here? Linda's looking at 5 to 7 years if the prosecutor pushes hard. Ray's looking at worse with the federal charges added. I understand, Frank said quietly. What do you want? Maximum punishment? Asset recovery? Both? Frank was quiet for a moment. Michelle started to speak, but Frank held up his hand. I want my dignity back, Frank said. I want the cabin my father left me. I want the money they stole. But mostly, I want everyone to know the truth, that I'm not the fool they think I am. Jim nodded slowly. Public exposure plus legal consequences. We can do that. He looked at Earl. Tell me about Friday. Earl leaned forward. VFW Veteran Recognition Ceremony. Starts at 7:30. Ray's scheduled to speak around 7:45. He's going to tell Frank's war stories. The ones I lived through with Frank. Khe-Sanh, the burning truck, the Purple Heart. And you're going to interrupt him? From the back of the room. Call him out. Then Frank shows his scar. Earl's voice was hard. 60, 70 witnesses. All veterans or veteran families. When they find out Ray's a fraud, his reputation dies in that room. Then what? Jim asked. Michelle pulled out a folder. Then I walk in with you and a deputy sheriff. We serve papers. Criminal complaints for fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and stolen valor. Civil suit for asset recovery and damages, all in front of those same witnesses. Jim smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. You've thought this through. I'm a paralegal, Michelle said. This is what I do. Good. I'll coordinate with the prosecutor's office and the sheriff. We'll have everything ready by Friday. Jim made notes on his legal pad. What about Linda? She gets served too, Michelle said, her voice flat. Same night, same witnesses. Jim looked at her carefully. That's your mother. That's a woman who stole from me and poisoned my relationship with my father for 5 years. Michelle's jaw was tight. She's a criminal. Treat her like one. They worked through lunch, building the case. Jim had an investigator. Danny, former cop, now did private work. He'd already started pulling Ray's business records, client lists, contract awards. 14 contracts in 3 years, Danny said, walking in with a thick folder. All of them list veteran-owned status as a qualifier. I talked to 3 clients. They all mentioned Ray's military service as a factor in hiring him. That's fraud, Jim said. Obtaining contracts under false pretenses. Gets better, Danny said. He pulled out printouts. Found Ray's marketing materials, website, brochures, business cards. All of them reference his combat experience and understanding of veteran needs. One brochure has a photo of him at the VFW, wearing a hat with Vietnam service ribbons. Earl's face went dark. He's wearing our ribbons. Can we prove he never served? Jim asked. Michelle nodded. I already pulled his service records. There are none. No Raymond Joseph Hollister in any military database. Then we have him, Jim said. Stolen valor is federal, FBI handles it, but the local prosecutor can add state fraud charges on top. He looked at Frank. You okay with Ray going to federal prison? Frank thought about Ray's hand on Linda's back, about the old fool bought it text, about 3 years of lies at Sunday dinner, about stolen stories and stolen service. Yes, Frank said. Tuesday afternoon, Dolores came by with news. The church quilting circle had officially uninvited Linda. The yoga studio where Linda and Ray had met, the instructor had called Linda and asked her not to return. Word was spreading, even before Friday's exposure. Small towns, Dolores said. People talk. People notice. Linda's been acting strange, nervous, jumpy. Ray hasn't been to the VFW in 2 weeks. They know something's wrong. Good, Earl said. Let them sweat. Wednesday, Michelle went to visit her kids in Indianapolis, brought them back with her Thursday afternoon. Emma was 8, Connor was 5. They'd never really met their grandfather, just once when Connor was an infant before Michelle stopped bringing them around. Frank was on the porch when they arrived. Connor jumped out of the car and stared at him. That's Grandpa? He asked Michelle. That's him? Connor walked up the porch steps slowly. Mom says you have a boat. Frank smiled. My daddy built one, at a cabin by a lake. Maybe we'll go see it soon. Cool, Connor said, then very seriously. Do you know how to fish? I do. Will you teach me? Frank's throat got tight. I'd like that, buddy. Emma was more cautious. She stayed close to Michelle, watching Frank with careful eyes. She looked like Michelle had at that age. Same dark hair, same serious expression. Hi, Emma, Frank said gently. Hi, Grandpa. She paused. Why didn't you visit us? Michelle started to intervene, but Frank held up his hand. That's a fair question. The truth is, I should have. I let too much time pass. I'm sorry for that. Emma considered this. Mom says sorry is just a word. You have to show it too. Your mom's right, Frank said. So how do I show it? You could teach me to fish too, Frank smiled. Deal. Thursday evening, the team gathered one last time. Frank, Michelle, Earl, Dolores, and Jim. They went over the plan minute by minute. 7:30 p.m. Ceremony starts. Frank, Michelle, and Earl take back row seats. 7:45 p.m. Ray begins his speech, tells his story about Vietnam. 7:50 p.m. Earl interrupts, calls him out publicly. 7:52 p.m. Frank shows his scar, truth visible in flesh. 7:55 p.m. Michelle enters with Jim and Deputy Marcus, papers served in front of everyone. 8:00 p.m. They leave. Let the VFW community process what just happened. What if Ray doesn't show? Michelle asked. He'll show, Earl said. Man's got an ego the size of Texas. He won't miss a chance to play hero. What if Linda tries to leave when she sees us? Dolores and the VFW auxiliary ladies will block the exits, Jim said. She's not getting out. They sat in silence for a moment. Tomorrow night, everything would change. Frank looked around at his kitchen table. His daughter, his war buddy, his neighbor, his lawyer. An army built from loyalty, not blood. Thank you, Frank said quietly. All of you. Don't thank us yet, Earl said. Thank us after Ray's in handcuffs. That night, Linda tried to be affectionate. Touched Frank's shoulder, asked if he wanted to watch a movie. Frank said he was tired, went to bed early. He lay there listening to her move around downstairs. Heard her on the phone, probably with Ray, heard her laugh at something. Tomorrow, the laughing would stop. Frank thought about his father, about the promise he'd made, about the cabin that had almost been stolen. I'm getting it back, Dad, he whispered to the dark. I promise. Outside, though, the Cardinals settled into the feeder for the night. Tomorrow would be cold, but spring was coming, and with it, justice. Friday evening came cold and clear. Frank stood in his bedroom, looking at himself in the mirror. He'd put on his good jeans, a pressed flannel shirt, his winter jacket. In his pocket, folded carefully, was his discharge certificate from 1970. In his other pocket, the Purple Heart he'd kept in a drawer for 43 years. Downstairs, Linda was getting ready too. She was going to support Ray, she'd said. It's important we show up for friends. Frank almost laughed. Michelle picked him up at 6:45. Earl was already in the back seat. They drove to the VFW in silence. The parking lot was filling up. Trucks, sedans, a few motorcycles. 70, maybe 80 people would be there tonight. Ray's LLC truck was already parked in front. Premium spot. The veteran owned and operated decal gleamed under the security lights. There he is, Earl said quietly, playing the part. They parked in back and walked in through the rear entrance. The basement hall smelled like fish fry grease and old coffee. Folding chairs set up in rows. American flag on one wall, POMI flag on the other, A third wall had photographs. Service members through the decades. Frank's picture was there. 1969, 22 years old, jungle fatigues, thin as a rail, eyes older than his years. Ray's picture wasn't there, because Ray had never served. Commander Tom was at the front, organizing. He was 40, Iraq veteran, 3 tours. When he saw Frank, he gave a tight nod. Earl had briefed him Tuesday. Tom knew what was coming. Frank, Michelle, and Earl took seats in the back row. Jim Pritchard and Deputy Sheriff Marcus waited in the kitchen out of sight. Dolores sat in the middle section with the VFW auxiliary ladies, strategic positioning to block exits if needed. At 7:15, Linda walked in. She saw Frank and froze, confused, then saw Michelle. Her face went through several expressions: surprise, worry, forced brightness. Frank? Michelle? I didn't know you were coming. Wouldn't miss it, Frank said evenly. Linda's eyes darted to Earl. She recognized him from decades ago. Earl? When did you... Drove in from Arizona, Earl said. Wanted to hear Ray's speech. Something flickered in Linda's face, fear, maybe, but she smiled and moved to a seat in the third row. Ray came over, clapped her shoulder, whispered something. Linda nodded, glanced back at Frank. They knew something was wrong, but not what. Not yet. At 7:30, Tom called the meeting to order. Pledge of allegiance. Prayer. Moment of silence for fallen brothers. Frank stood with the others, hand over his heart, thinking about the men who didn't make it home. Tonight, we honor those who served in Vietnam, Tom said. Would our Vietnam veterans please stand? 6 men stood, Frank among them, Ray among them. Applause filled the room. Frank sat down. Ray remained standing an extra beat, soaking it in. Tom introduced the evening's speaker. Ray Hollister has been a valued member of our community. Local contractor, veteran-owned business, served his country with honor. Ray, come on up. Ray walked to the podium. He was wearing a VFW cap now, Vietnam service ribbons on it. Ribbons he hadn't earned. He adjusted the microphone, smiled at the crowd. Thank you, Commander Tom. It's an honor to be here. Ray's voice was confident, practiced. I don't talk about my service much. Most of us don't. But tonight, I want to share something that changed my life. Frank's hands tightened on the chair arms. Michelle touched his shoulder. In 1969, Ray continued, at Khe Sanh, my unit was pinned down. Rockets coming in, chaos everywhere. My buddy's truck took a direct hit, burst into flames. Earl's jaw clenched. Frank could hear him breathing hard. I could have run, Ray said. Probably should have, but you don't leave a man behind, so I went in after him. Pulled him out of that burning truck. Got shrapnel in my arm doing it. Ray rolled up his sleeve briefly, showing an unmarked arm. Earned a Purple Heart that day, but more important, I learned what brotherhood means. The room was silent, respectful, younger veterans nodding. Some had heard this story before. Ray was building to his conclusion. That's why I started my business, to serve those who served, to understand what veterans need, because I'm one of... That's Frank Morrison's story, Ray. Earl's voice cut through the room like a rifle shot. Every head turned. Ray's face went pale. Earl, sit down, Ray said, trying to sound reasonable. You're confused. Earl stood up slowly. I'm not confused. Frank's the one who was at Quezon. Frank's the one with the Purple Heart. He pointed at Frank. And I'm the one he pulled from that burning truck. Murmurs spread through the room. Ray's smile faltered. Earl, it was dark. Things were chaotic. It was 2 p.m., Ray, broad daylight, and you weren't there. Tom stepped forward. Ray, is this true? No. Earl's misremembering. He was injured. Frank stood, walked down the center aisle. His boots on the linoleum were the only sound. 70 people watching. He reached the podium, looked at Ray. Ray's face was white, sweat visible on his forehead. Frank didn't say anything, just unbuttoned his left sleeve, rolled it up slowly, deliberately. The shrapnel scar ran from wrist to elbow, jagged, white. 43 years old, but still visible, still real. Frank held his arm out so everyone could see. This is Quezon, Ray. His voice was quiet, but carried. Show them yours. Ray's mouth opened, closed. You're misunderstanding. Show them your scar, Earl said from the back. Show them your discharge papers, someone called out. Show them your Purple Heart, another voice added. Tom stepped beside Frank. Ray, I checked your service record after Frank came to me Tuesday. There's no Raymond Joseph Hollister in the military database. No service. No discharge. Nothing. The room erupted, voices overlapping, angry, shocked. You're telling us you lied? He's been lying for years. Well, stolen valor. Get him out of here. Ray backed away from the podium, hands up. You don't understand. I supported the troops. Supporting ain't serving, Earl said, his voice cutting through the noise. The side door opened. Michelle walked in, Jim Pritchard beside her, Deputy Sheriff Marcus in uniform behind them. The room went quiet again. Raymond Joseph Hollister. Michelle's voice was clear, cold. You're being served. Marcus handed Ray the papers. Ray's hands shook so badly they scattered to the floor. Conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, forgery, and violation of the Stolen Valor Act of 2013, a federal crime, Michelle continued. You have the right to... Linda, Ray's voice cracked. Linda, tell them this was your idea. But Linda was already moving toward the back exit. She pushed past 2 people, almost made it to the door. Dolores stepped in front of her, arms crossed. 2 other auxiliary ladies flanked her. You're not leaving yet, honey, Dolores said. Linda turned, saw Jim approaching with more papers, saw Deputy Marcus. Her face crumpled. Linda Morrison, Jim said. You're also being served. Criminal complaints for fraud, forgery, identity theft, and conspiracy. Linda took the papers with shaking hands. Her mascara was already running. She looked at Frank across the room. He looked back. Nothing in his eyes but ice. Tom handed Frank the microphone. The room went silent. Frank looked at all of them. Veterans he'd known for decades, younger vets, families, his daughter, his friend, his neighbor. I spent 42 years fixing things quietly, he said. His voice was steady. Thought that's what men do. Stay quiet, do the work, don't complain. He paused. But I learned something these past 3 weeks. He looked at Ray, at Linda, both holding papers, both destroyed. Silence doesn't mean surrender. It means I was choosing my moment. He turned to the room. Real friends don't steal your stories. Real family doesn't steal your legacy. And real men don't lie about serving their country. He looked at Ray specifically. You said you served in spirit. Let me tell you about spirit. Spirit is Earl driving 800 miles through a snowstorm because a friend needed him. Spirit is my daughter using her skills to protect me. Spirit is Dolores bringing casseroles and evidence in the same Tupperware. Frank's voice hardened. That's spirit. You wouldn't know it if it slapped you in the face. He handed the microphone back to Tom and walked toward the exit. Michelle and Earl fell in beside him. Behind them, The room erupted in applause. 60 veterans, choosing truth, choosing Frank. Ray slumped in a chair, papers scattered around his feet. Linda was sobbing, surrounded by hostile faces. Tom's voice boomed. Ray Hollister, you are permanently banned from this post and all VFW facilities in the state of Indiana. Frank didn't look back. He walked out into the February cold, his daughter on one side, his brother in arms on the other. How do you feel? Michelle asked quietly. Frank breathed the cold air, felt the weight of the Purple Heart in his pocket, thought about his father. Like I kept my promise, he said. Saturday morning, Frank's phone started ringing at 7. The old rotary in the kitchen, the one that rarely made a sound anymore. Pastor Jim called first. The church council met last night. We want you to know we support you, Frank. Then Sally from the diner. Coffee's on the house for the rest of your life. Bob from the hardware store. Ray came in this morning. I told him to leave. Won't be serving him again. By noon, half the town had called or stopped by. Each one the same message. They believed Frank. They were ashamed they hadn't seen it sooner. They were on his side. Monday morning, Frank walked Main Street for the first time since Friday. It felt like running a gauntlet, but a good one. People nodded, shook his hand. The barber called out from his doorway. Heard what you said at the VFW. About damn time someone stood up. At the diner, Sally brought him breakfast without asking. Usual spot, Frank. She squeezed his shoulder. Your wife came in yesterday. Told her we don't serve her kind. Frank looked around the diner. 6 people he'd known for decades. All of them nodding at him, some raising coffee cups in solidarity. Small-town justice. Quiet. Devastating. Earl heard through the VFW network that Ray's business had collapsed over the weekend. 3 clients had filed lawsuits for fraud and misrepresentation. The bank had called his loans, veteran preference terms revoked the moment they learned he'd never served. His office had a closed sign on the door. Debbie, Ray's wife, had filed divorce papers Saturday morning. She'd been at the VFW ceremony, heard everything, slapped Ray in the parking lot in front of 20 witnesses before driving away. Ray was staying at the Red Roof Inn on Route 40. His truck had been repossessed. The veteran-owned decal scraped off, leaving a ghost outline on the door. Linda had moved in with her sister in Fort Wayne. The church quilting circle had voted unanimously to remove her. The yoga studio had asked her not to return. Even the hairdresser, the one who'd turned away during the kiss, had left a voicemail saying Linda needed to find a new salon. Everything Linda had built, her reputation, her social standing, her carefully constructed church lady persona, gone in 72 hours. Tuesday afternoon, Jim Pritchard called with the settlement offer. Frank and Michelle sat in Jim's office, the proposal spread across the desk. The prosecutor likes this case, Jim said, but she's willing to deal if Frank is. He pointed to the terms. Linda pleads guilty to fraud and forgery, reduced from felony to misdemeanor, 2 years probation, $87,000 restitution, 2 hours community service. Criminal record, Ray pleads guilty to fraud and stolen valor, 4 years federal prison, business liquidated, $43,000 restitution. Michelle's jaw was tight. They deserve worse. Maximum sentences, trial, public humiliation. They've already got public humiliation, Jim said. This town will never forget. And a trial means a year of your life in court, Frank. Media attention, reliving it daily. Michelle looked at her father. What do you want, Dad? Frank stared at the settlement papers, thought about a year in court, thought about testifying, about Linda's lawyer trying to make him look cold and distant, about the media turning it into entertainment. He thought about the cabin deed that had been restored to his name yesterday, about Michelle sleeping in her old bedroom, about Earl deciding to stay through spring, about teaching Connor to fish. I'm tired of burning, Frank said quietly. I want to build something. Dad, your mom's going to have a criminal record. She'll never work again. Her reputation is destroyed. Ray's going to prison. His business is gone. Frank looked at Michelle. That's enough. I got the cabin back. I got you back. That's what matters. Michelle's eyes were wet. You're better than me. I'd want blood. I know you would, honey, but I'm 68. I don't have time for vengeance. I want to spend time with my grandkids. Frank looked at Jim. I'll take the settlement. Wednesday, the deed arrived in the mail, the cabin legally restored to Frank's name. All fraudulent transfers voided. Frank held the paper, his father's name visible above his own. Got it back, Dad, he whispered. Spring was coming, and with it, a fishing trip to teach his grandson what his father had taught him. Some things mattered more than revenge. The first Saturday in April, Frank drove to the cabin with his whole world in the truck. Michelle in the passenger seat, Emma and Connor in the back, faces pressed to the windows. Earl following behind in his Silverado, toolbox rattling in the bed. The cabin sat exactly where Frank's father had built it in 1962. Weathered wood, tin roof that needed patching, the dock where Frank had learned to fish, where his father had taught him patience and how to be still. 27 years since he'd been here. 27 years of avoiding the grief, the memories, the promise he'd almost failed to keep. Connor jumped out of the truck before it fully stopped. "Grandpa, is that the lake?" "That's it, buddy." "Can we fish right now?" Frank smiled. "Let's see if the dock still holds us first." They spent the morning working, Earl and Frank replacing rotted boards, Michelle cleaning out the interior, dust and mouse droppings and time, Emma helping her grandmother's things that Linda had never bothered to pack. By noon, the dock was solid again. Frank brought out his old tackle box, the one his father had given him in 1965, showed Connor how to bait a hook, the same way Dad had shown him. "You gotta be patient," Frank said, kneeling beside the boy. "Fishing's not about catching, it's about being here, paying attention." "What are we paying attention to?" "Everything, the water, the birds, each other." Emma joined them, wanting to learn too. Frank taught them both, his hands over theirs, showing them the motion. Michelle sat on the dock behind them, crying quietly, happily. Earl was on the roof, hammering new tin. The sound echoed across the lake, rhythmic, solid, the sound of things being fixed. At 2 o'clock, Connor's line jerked. "Grandpa, easy, don't yank, just reel steady." The base broke the surface. Small, maybe a pound. Connor's eyes went huge. Emma squealed. Michelle got her phone out, taking pictures. Frank helped Connor bring it in, showed him how to hold it, how to remove the hook gently. "Can we keep it?" Connor asked. Frank knelt down to his grandson's level. "We could, but let me teach you something my daddy taught me." He held the fish carefully. "This fish is young, like you, got a lot of living to do. If we let him go, he grows, gets bigger. Maybe your kids catch him someday." "My kids?" "Yep, that's how it works. Your great-grandpa taught me here. I'm teaching you, someday you'll teach your kids." Frank paused. Some things are worth more when you let them go. Connor thought about this. Then carefully, with Frank's help, he lowered the base back into the water. They watched it swim away, strong and quick. "Will we come back?" Connor asked. "Every summer," Frank promised. "This is your place now, too." That evening, they built a fire in the pit. Emma roasting marshmallows, Connor asleep on Michelle's lap, Earl telling stories about Arizona, the stars coming out over the lake. Frank sat quiet, watching the flames, listening to his family. The cardinals had nested in the pines. He'd seen them that morning, mating for life. Coming back every year, like Frank, finally home, finally at peace. Michelle squeezed his shoulder. "Thanks for not giving up, Dad." Frank looked at his daughter, at his grandchildren, at the lake his father had loved. "Thanks for coming home," he said. Frank Morrison learned what a lot of men learned too late. Silence is only powerful when you can roar if you need to. For 42 years, he'd fixed things without asking for thanks. Built bird feeders, repaired cabinets, kept promises. He thought his work would speak for him. But some people mistake quiet for stupid, restraint for surrender. The thing is, Frank could roar. He proved it at that VFW hall, in front of 60 witnesses, with a scar that told the truth his mouth had kept quiet for 43 years. Then he chose to be quiet again, but this time on his terms. Dignity can't be stolen, only surrendered. And Frank never surrendered. There's a particular cruelty in how the world treats older men, the invisible labor, the taken-for-granted years. Linda and Ray thought Frank at 68 would be easy prey, too old to fight, too tired to care, too isolated to win. They forgot that quiet men built this country, survived wars, endured losses. Age doesn't mean weak. Sometimes it just means patient enough to choose your moment. Blood disappointed Frank. His wife betrayed him. His daughter was poisoned against him. But chosen family saved him. Earl driving 1,800 miles. Dolores bringing evidence with the casseroles. Michelle coming home with her legal mind and fierce heart. That's what family really is. People who show up when it matters. Now Frank sits on that cabin dock most mornings teaching his grandson to fish. The same lessons his father taught him at this exact spot. The same dock, rebuilt, The same water, always moving, the same cardinals coming back every spring like promises kept. Linda's in Fort Wayne, alone, with a criminal record and a destroyed reputation. Ray's in federal prison. Their betrayal cost them everything. Frank's betrayal cost him a marriage he'd already lost and gave him back a daughter he thought was gone forever. He chose peace over vengeance. Not because he was weak, but because at 68 he finally understood. The best revenge isn't destroying your enemies, it's living well. Frank watches Connor release another fish, learning the same lesson about letting go. About what's worth keeping and what's worth releasing. About how some victories are quiet. The sun sets over the lake. The tin roof, Earl fixed, gleams in the golden light. Michelle's laugh drifts from inside the cabin. The coffee's hot in tin cups. The cardinals call from the pines. This is what victory looks like when you're 68. Not loud, not flashy, not revenge-filled, just peace. Earned peace. The kind that lasts. If you're a man who fixes things quietly, who works without applause, who thinks being decent is enough, remember Frank Morrison, silence is fine. Being a doormat is not. Know the difference. And when someone mistakes your silence for surrender, show them your scar. Tell them your truth, walk out with your head high, then go build something worth keeping.